Hey guys, tonight we step delicately into a world of corsets, calling cards, and so many rules about handholding, it could make your head spin. Picture it, you're strolling slowly through a park in Victorian London, your gloves are spotless, your posture rigid, and every move you make could change the course of your romantic future. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and rose water, and nearby, a fountain trickles as a lady in a bonnet pointedly ignores your presence. You've entered the realm of Victorian dating, a place so rule-bound, you probably won't survive it unless you can master the art of the polite glance, the perfectly timed bow, and an entire symphony of coded silences. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world around you moves slowly. That's the first thing you notice. It's the late 1800s, and romance happens in pauses, in looks, in faint blushes behind a parasol. You're on a promenade, maybe in Hyde Park, maybe in a quieter corner of Bath, where men and women walk in slow, looping circuits. You don't stop and talk, not yet. That would be forward. You glance. Nod, maybe exchange a faint smile if you're feeling especially daring. If her chaperone doesn't notice, Victorian courtship begins here, with what they called the season. For upper-class young ladies, this was a months-long swirl of events, balls, teas, walks, and carefully supervised encounters, all designed to help you land a husband. You are, effectively, being shown off. And you are expected to be charming, well-groomed, not too bold, and not too shy. You should express your personality, but only the parts that look good in candlelight. You might be thinking, how hard could this really be? But imagine this, you're walking beside someone you really like. You can't hold their hand. You can't say anything flirtatious. You can't ask to see them alone. The most scandalous thing you can legally do is compliment their taste in ferns. And even then, you better use the word taste carefully, your wardrobe isn't helping either. For ladies, there's the corset cinched until breathing is a hobby, the heavy skirt swishing with every cautious step, and a hat so wide it blocks your peripheral vision. For men, a stiff collar cuts at your neck while you sweat quietly in a black wool suit. Yes, even in summer, every glance is deliberate. Every smile is loaded. And this isn't exaggeration, it's code. Because actual words. Far too risky, one blink too many and you're forward. One missed curtsy and you're cold. One misjudged stare and your aunt will write to your mother to ask if you're becoming fast, which is Victorian for a bit too enthusiastic and possibly morally unstable. But let's say you're doing okay. You've managed a few walks. Maybe she started to nod at you instead of just looking past you as though you're part of the shrubbery. You've moved from total strangers to mildly known in daylight. Now what? Now comes the next bizarre step in this courtship dance, maneuvering around the concept of propriety. You're not allowed to make any direct romantic overture. So instead, you orchestrate chance meetings. You join the same volunteer reading circle. You happen to show up to the same church fête. You attend the same dull lecture on the ethics of poultry keeping, just in case they'll be there. Historians still argue whether Victorian courtship was mostly innocent ritual or carefully disguised matchmaking warfare. Some say it was all terribly sweet. Others suggest it was a performative charade where everyone was lying with a straight face, trying to marry rich and avoid scandal. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between the bonnet ribbons and the secret notes. Now, if you were really clever, you'd enlist allies. The chaperone, of course, is your biggest obstacle. She's usually an aunt or elder sister whose job is to be boring, ever-present, and immune to charm. But if you win her over, perhaps through subtle flattery, or shared love of lemon sponge, you might find her suspiciously slow to intervene when you and your hopeful companion pause near the roses for an extra moment or two. Still, you must never, under any circumstance, touch. Even a brush of fingers is scandalous. Wrists? Out of the question. And heaven forbid you get caught adjusting her shawl, that's practically a proposal. To communicate interest, you have to get creative. Which leads us to one of the more whimsical, and completely real, quirks of the age, the flirtation fan language. Yes, ladies used their fans not only to cool themselves but to flash coded messages. Opening the fan slowly meant wait for me. Touching the tip of the fan to the lips meant kiss me. Dropping it all together meant I hate you. Efficient, no, though in practice, this system probably caused more confusion than clarity. Especially if a breeze blew at the wrong time. Or you sneezed. Suddenly you're declaring your love to a stranger across the path because your fan slipped mid-allergy. There's another peculiar but oddly charming detail here. Victorian people loved metaphor. Especially botanical metaphor. If she gives you a violet, it means modesty. A daisy means innocence. A yellow rose? Jealousy. So imagine walking home with a handful of wilting symbolism and trying to decipher whether it's a good or very bad sign. You trudge back through the gravel path, shoes pinching, your hat tilted just slightly from where it was tugged by a low branch. You saw her again, you think. Maybe she smiled. Or maybe she sneezed and it looked like a smile. You'll spend the evening rereading the moment in your head like a Victorian diary entry, and yet, despite the limitations, despite the layers of clothing and the army of relatives, there's something undeniably romantic here. The suspense of it. The slowness. The tension of two people leaning toward one another in a world that insists they lean away. It's not exactly practical. It's not particularly honest. But it's unforgettable. You walk home slowly, mind racing with imagined futures and polite disasters. You've survived one more Victorian outing with your dignity, and your cravat, mostly intact. But this is just the beginning, you haven't even touched the calling card tray yet. The door creaks ever so slightly as you step into the front hallway of a grand Victorian home. The butler glances up, not at you, of course, but at your gloves, your coat, your boots, and most importantly, the small, stiff rectangle in your gloved hand. A calling card. Pristine. Embossed. Hopefully not smudged. Because in this age of filtered etiquette and romantic obstacle courses, your romantic intentions must first be announced via cardstock. The calling card tray sits silently on a mahogany sideboard, waiting to assess your worth. You place your card gently, no, reverently, on the silver dish, trying not to let it clink too loudly. This is the moment when your entire courtship journey might begin, or end, without you uttering a single word. In Victorian dating, visiting someone's home didn't mean crashing on the couch and asking what's for tea. It was a ceremony. A ritualized performance complete with invisible footlights and no intermission. For men, the calling card was the polite battering ram at the gate of a young lady's domestic fortress. If her family approved, your card would be kept. If not, it might mysteriously vanish, or worse, be returned to you folded in half, a symbolic death knell for your hopes. You step back, hands clasped, pretending not to notice how the maid glances down at your boots. Did you polish them enough? Is your cravat slightly off-center? Did the rain dampen your lapels? Because here's the thing, first impressions are no small matter. This is a world where everything speaks. Your handwriting, your card stock, the way you stand while waiting, all of it gets silently filed under suitable or utterly unworthy. And if you're lucky enough to be deemed acceptable, you might just be permitted to call during the appropriate hours, typically between 3 and 5 p.m., under full surveillance. Oh, and don't bother hoping for a one-on-one chat. Victorian parlors are performance spaces. You're seated across from the young lady, perhaps with a table of figurines awkwardly dividing you. Around you, doilies, houseplants, footstools, and at least one painfully alert relative pretending to read a novel but really listening with hawk-like precision, the conversation must be light. Nothing too personal, of course. Don't mention politics. Don't comment on weather with too much enthusiasm, that could be interpreted as suggestive. Talk about travel, books, or some harmless scandal involving a duke who accidentally married his housemate's cousin's governess. Smile. Sit up straight. Speak in pleasant tones and absolutely, under no circumstances, let your knee brush the coffee table. That's practically an indecent proposal, but beneath the rigid formality, real chemistry sometimes crackles. The lilt in her voice when she asks your opinion on Byron. The way your eyes meet for half a second longer than is strictly acceptable. The fact that you both chuckled at the same poorly told anecdote about someone's goose escaping the garden. Tiny clues. Micro moments. The whole thing feels like flirting by Morse code, and yet, you feel the weight of time pressing on your shoulders. You know that your call can only last 15 minutes, 20 at most, before it tips into the realm of social awkwardness. Linger too long, and the hostess might raise her eyebrows or, worse, ring a little bell signaling it's time for you to go. You rise. You bow. You fumble to collect your hat. The lady nods politely, her expression neutral. Did she enjoy your visit? Or is she merely being polite to a man who bored her half to death with a story about a railway timetable? You don't know. That's half the charm, and half the agony. Historians still argue whether this parlor ritual actually helped people fall in love or simply gave everyone a chance to practice their best false smiles. Was it a necessary step in maintaining social order, or just a long-winded way of keeping people busy before the invention of texting? Here's a curious detail you might enjoy. Some Victorian families had multiple calling card trays, one for welcome guests and one for "oh no, not him again." The second tray was never seen by outsiders, of course, but the staff knew exactly where to place certain cards. So while you imagined your card being carefully filed away as a hopeful suitor's token, it might actually be sitting in the back hallway, used to wedge open a window. Still, you persist. Because in this world, persistence is half the battle. If your visits go well, if you follow all the rules, flatter the right people, and bring compliments that toe the line between charming and chaste, you might be invited to a family dinner. Now, don't get too excited. That dinner won't be candlelit and cozy. It will involve at least 8 forks, 17 rules about posture, and one grandfather who insists on quoting Latin proverbs between bites. But being invited to dine is a major step. It means your presence is tolerable enough for prolonged exposure. Dinner is a minefield of conversation topics. Religion is too heavy. Personal illness is too intimate. Humor must be dry and always at your own expense. And if you tell a story about an accident involving an umbrella and a horse, make sure the horse is noble and the umbrella doesn't belong to a woman, otherwise, things get weird very fast. And then, of course, there's the curfew, yes. Even though you are fully dressed, chaperoned, and supervised to the point of paralysis, you must leave by a certain time. Some households enforce a 9 p.m. cutoff for unmarried visitors. Others allow you to linger until 10, but only if a family member is still knitting in the next chair. Stay too long, and rumors will swirl faster than a midsummer thunderstorm. If you're a lady receiving callers, the rules are even stricter. You must never appear too eager. You may only sit in certain chairs. You must always have embroidery nearby, even if you're just poking the same stitch for an hour, because idle hands, you know, are the devil's plaything, and if someone catches you smiling just a little too often at the same gentleman, beware, your name may end up in someone's diary, and Victorian diaries were like the group chats of their day, written with venom, stored forever, and frequently misquoted. Still, amid all this control and stiffness, there's a peculiar sweetness in the slow burn of it all. Each step, each layer of interaction, feels like unlocking a level in a game that was designed to take years. There's no swiping left. No emojis. Just you, a polished calling card, a tray, and the faintest hope of an invitation to tea. And here's a quirky tidbit: some men took to scenting their calling cards. A light hint of cologne, lavender, or even rose water could be used to stand out, subtly, of course. Overdo it, and you'd smell like a perfume thief. But just enough, and the young lady might remember your card among the dozens. Like a sniffable love letter. So now, as you step back out into the cobbled street, you adjust your cravat and wonder if your card will be remembered. If her eyes will scan the tray tomorrow and land on your name with the tiniest flicker of interest. You imagine her smile, her soft voice asking whether you'll call again. You walk slowly, partly because your boots are not built for speed, but mostly because part of you wants to remember every step of this, the quiet drama of the visit, the thrum of uncertainty, the moment your eyes met across a sea of teacups and antimacassars. It's not romance as we know it. But it's something. And it's just the beginning. You're back in the garden. The air smells of roses and slightly overwatered geraniums. A gravel path winds its way between neatly trimmed hedges, and somewhere behind you, the faint clinking of teacups reminds you that you're not truly alone. You never are. Not during Victorian courtship, because hovering nearby, pretending to admire a marigold or mend a loose stitch, is the one figure more constant than your own shadow, the chaperone. She's always there. Always watching. A walking embodiment of rules, wrapped in lace and lavender water. Today, it's her third niece she's minding. Or maybe her daughter. It hardly matters. Her real passion in life is preventing even the possibility of a scandal. You take a step closer to the young lady beside you. The chaperone coughs meaningfully. You step back. Victorian society wasn't just built on rules, it was made entirely of them. And the most immovable rule of all. A young unmarried woman must never, ever be left alone with a man who is not her relative. Not on a walk. Not in a parlor. Not even for a moment, which is how we got chaperones, guardians of virtue, enforcers of modesty, and unblinking presences with remarkable endurance for uncomfortable silences. You may think you're alone in this quiet moment among the hedges. But she's only 12 feet away. Reading a well-thumbed book of sermons. Or perhaps not reading at all, just holding it in front of her eyes while listening to your every word. And she's not the only one. Every servant, every younger sibling, every family friend is a potential witness. A casual remark could be reported. A shared laugh could be misunderstood. A compliment on her hair. That's teetering on the edge of impropriety unless framed with the delicacy of a diplomat, so you talk about the garden. The weather. The upcoming charity raffle. You praise the fruitcake served at luncheon with the enthusiasm of someone trying to flatter her aunt's baking without sounding overeager. And through it all, your companion responds with impeccable decorum, only occasionally glancing your way with the tiniest twitch of amusement. Or is it disinterest? Hard to say. The chaperone, of course, has her own version of the story. She might once have had a sweetheart herself, a dashing officer lost at sea or an earnest solicitor who never quite made enough to marry. Now, she supervises. It's her job to hold the line between innocence and impropriety, between giggles and ruination, because in the Victorian mind, virtue is like fine porcelain, valuable, delicate, and once cracked, impossible to repair. Historians still argue whether chaperones were mostly helpful guides or silent saboteurs. Some accounts suggest they offered whispered encouragements and even helped pass secret letters. Others say they were human barricades, stamping out passion like a gardener squashing a slug, and yet, there's an odd affection that often develops between the chaperone and her charge. Shared winks. Discreet shielding. Strategic coughs to buy you time to collect your flustered thoughts. If you're lucky, she's the kind who pretends not to notice a half-second glance or an unusually long discussion about rhododendrons, but the truth is, her presence is meant to suppress risk. You might feel you're getting closer to the young lady beside you, but this is not a story where boldness is rewarded. This is a tale of subtleties. Of slow-burning possibility. One misstep, a poorly chosen phrase, a flippant remark, and the chaperone might report back to the family, or worse, the town gossips. Of course, the rich weren't the only ones dating under surveillance. Middle-class girls had their own versions of chaperonage. Sometimes it was a mother. Other times a stricter older sister, whose idea of romance had long since been reduced to sighing heavily during novels. Even working-class girls often walked with a friend or sibling, if only to prevent the sort of attention that ended in whispers and ruined reputations. Regardless of class, the message was clear: never be seen alone with a man. Now imagine you're at a picnic. It's a bright spring day. Everyone is talking about the new steam omnibus route or the scandalous novel serialized in the Illustrated London News. You're seated on a blanket beside the young lady, nervously balancing a plate of cucumber sandwiches. You pass her a scone. Your fingers nearly touch. The chaperone stiffens, the young lady coughs and pulls back politely. You nod, pretending nothing happened. The conversation shifts to the price of tulip bulbs. It's hard not to feel like you're acting in a very polite stage play. Every line rehearsed. Every gesture monitored. But that's Victorian dating, an improvised performance with the highest of stakes, and yet, sometimes, beneath all the polite nothingness, something real flickers. You notice how she smiles just before the chaperone looks up. Or how she places her hand near yours on the picnic blanket, not touching, of course, but not entirely distant either. These moments feel electric, and here's a quirky tidbit for you: some families hired professional chaperones. Yes, actual women whose sole job was to supervise courtships. They were often widows or older governesses, paid to accompany daughters to social events and ensure no improprieties occurred. Imagine getting paid to watch people not flirt. One of the few acceptable ways to spend time together was at a dance or ball. But even there, the chaperone would stand at the edge of the floor, monitoring your every spin and step. A gentleman could only dance twice with the same lady in one evening before eyebrows rose. A third dance was practically a proposal, and let's not forget church outings, one of the few socially sanctioned excuses to be in the same vicinity as someone you liked. The chaperone, of course, would be in the pew just behind, humming pointedly during the hymns. The real challenge is maintaining your composure. You want to show interest, but not too much. You want to be warm, but not improper. You want to say, "I think about you constantly," but instead you say, "The chrysanthemums this year are rather late, don't you think?" But here's the secret: she knows. She sees it in the way you glance at her when you think no one's looking. In how you lower your voice when speaking directly to her. In the way your stories always end with a hopeful question: "And the chaperone?" Maybe she knows too. Maybe she pretends not to. Or maybe, just maybe, she's the reason you still get invited back. You finish your walk, the young lady nods politely, and the chaperone finally closes her book. You've survived another garden encounter, another hour of conversation laced with invisible threads of hope and etiquette. As you head back down the gravel path, your boots crunch softly, and you glance over your shoulder. She's still watching you from the porch, expression unreadable. You tip your hat. Just slightly, and she smiles, a small, quiet victory. You're in a conservatory now, sunlight streaming through tall panes of dusty glass, the scent of warm soil and slightly overwatered violets pressing close. It's the kind of place where you can admire both the begonias and the young lady beside them, though not too openly. Not yet. Today, though, you're not here to talk about flowers. You're here to speak with them. Welcome to one of the most peculiar and oddly poetic quirks of Victorian romance, the language of flowers. You can't say how you feel, not directly. That would be scandalous. So instead, you let a bouquet do the talking, and hope she interprets it correctly. In this world, every bloom has a meaning. Roses? Obvious. Red for love. White for purity. Forget-me-nots? Well, the name says it all. A daffodil? That means new beginnings. Lovely. But a marigold? Grief. Definitely not first date material. And heaven help you if you hand someone a yellow carnation. That one says you disappoint me. Bold choice, so you choose carefully. You study floral dictionaries, the kind printed in thick books with names like Floriography for the Thoughtful Gentleman or the Discreet Language of Petals. You commit their pages to memory like a student cramming for an emotional exam. You select a sprig of lavender, devotion, a pink camellia, longing, and a pansy, thinking of you. Wrapped together in fine paper, they become your message. One that a lady might receive and read like a coded letter, but of course, even flowers can betray you. One slightly wilted stem might be taken as insult. A bloom placed upside down could reverse its meaning entirely. A red rose handed left-handed, according to one interpretation, could mean I love you but cannot pursue it. Romantic? Maybe. Confusing? Absolutely. You see, in a culture where speech is controlled, symbolism becomes its own language, one that's frustratingly easy to misread. Let's say you send her a bouquet. She accepts it with a polite nod. But later, you see it sitting untouched in a vase, petals drooping slightly under the weight of misunderstanding. Did she misinterpret your pansy as mere politeness? Did she think the lavender was too forward? Did her mother read the camellia and veto the whole thing? Historians still argue whether Victorian floral codes were truly taken seriously, or whether most bouquets were simply appreciated for looking nice and not smelling too weird. Some say young lovers used them religiously. Others think it was mostly magazine fluff, the 19th century equivalent of a Cosmo quiz, but there's something undeniably charming about it, isn't there? This notion that you might carry your heart in your pocket, nestled among stems and satin ribbon. That the trembling handoff of a posy could be more daring than a kiss, and it wasn't just for courtship. Flowers were everywhere. Tucked into fans. Sewn into embroidery. Painted on lockets and handkerchiefs. And yes, worn in hair, though with great care. A sprig of rosemary on the left side. That meant remembrance. A snowdrop tucked behind the ear. Consolation. A bold move at a dinner party, depending on who noticed, which brings us to another point. Sending flowers wasn't always a private affair, sometimes a bouquet arrived in full view of an entire household. Carried in by the footman, unwrapped at the breakfast table, placed squarely between the toast rack and the marmalade. And everyone would lean just slightly closer to see what you'd sent. The message wasn't just to her, it was to everyone watching. It said, I am brave enough to declare my interest. And I can afford exotic blooms in winter. Of course, some took it too far. There are accounts of suitors sending dozens of roses, complete with odes, satin ribbons, and even live butterflies tucked into decorative cages. That might sound whimsical. But butterflies don't travel well. The result was often more tragic than charming. Still, if you couldn't afford flamboyant gestures, you could at least be clever. A well-chosen sprig of thyme, courage, wrapped with a humble daisy, loyal love, said far more than a wheelbarrow full of orchids. It meant you understood her. You noticed things. And in a world where women were often seen but rarely heard, that was everything. Now imagine this scene. You're standing beside her in the conservatory. Between you, a pot of violets. She gently plucks a single bloom and hands it to you. Just for a second, her fingers brush yours. The chaperone sneezes pointedly in the corner. You glance down at the flower in your palm. Violet, faithfulness, and maybe, just maybe, you allow yourself a moment of silent triumph. Still, you don't say a word. Instead, you tuck the violet into your lapel and talk about the relative merits of begonias versus lilies. She listens. She smiles. She knows what you know, quirky detail time. Some couples composed entire conversations in flowers. He'd send her a coded bouquet. She'd reply with a similarly crafted bundle the next day. Entire flirtations played out in ferns and freesia, like botanical texting. Long delays, high ambiguity, questionable reception. In one famously muddled case, a young man meant to declare eternal devotion with a bouquet heavy in tulips and ivy. Unfortunately, he accidentally included a single white poppy, meaning sleep or forgetfulness. She thought he was ending the courtship. He thought she was being cold. It took 6 months and 3 family dinners to sort it out, and then, of course, there's the social risk of being seen holding flowers from the wrong person. A gift from a gentleman of lower status could spark whisper campaigns that spread through drawing rooms faster than gout at a seaside spa, so some women burned the bouquets. Not out of dislike, but to destroy the evidence, others pressed the flowers into books, saving them as quiet keepsakes, unreadable by anyone but the two of you. There are Victorian journals filled with such pressed petals, dated and labeled like secret diaries. Historians have found them hidden in drawers, tucked behind paintings, or sewn into quilt linings. Love, reduced to flattened fragrance. You might be wondering how this all played out across class lines. Truthfully, flower language was most beloved by the middle and upper classes. The working poor had less time for symbolic daffodils when they were dodging soot and trying to make rent. But even so, on holidays, market boys might hand a girl a carnation, hoping she knew what it meant. And in those brief, beautiful moments, even they participated in the strange, fragrant ritual. So here you are. Standing once more at the gate of her home, a bouquet in hand. Today it's cornflowers, hope and love, nestled beside pink hyacinths, playfulness, and a single sweet pea, departure. But with affection. You hope she reads your message. You hope it's received in the spirit you intended, and if it's misunderstood, well, that's part of the fun. You ring the bell, a maid opens the door, you hand her the bouquet with a polite smile, she nods. She knows what it means. Or at least, she pretends to. The door closes, you stand there a moment longer, as the scent of lavender and jasmine fades into the street, not a word exchanged. And yet, you've said so much. The ballroom is already warm by the time you arrive, the scent of beeswax, perfume, and anxious perspiration mingling beneath a dozen glittering chandeliers. Velvet drapes frame tall windows. A string quartet tunes up in the corner. You step inside and realize at once, this is not just a dance. This is a social battlefield, wrapped in silk and lit by candlelight. You've been invited to a formal ball. This alone means something. You're either well-born, well-connected, or possibly both. But don't get too comfortable. One misstep tonight can destroy your entire romantic trajectory. That's not melodrama. That's Victorian reality. Your gloves are on, of course, always gloves, and your shoes gleam unnaturally from the half hour you spent polishing them in a mild panic. You've practiced your bow. You've reminded yourself which direction to rotate during a waltz, clockwise, please, and you've committed at least 3 neutral conversation topics to memory. The latest painting exhibition, the Queen's rumored health, and whether or not rail travel is corrupting the moral fiber of society. You glance around. There she is. The young lady you've been calling on, corseted, composed, and trying not to look directly at you while also definitely checking whether you've arrived. You're meant to approach. But you can't just waltz up and ask for a dance. First, you must request permission from her chaperone. Or her father. Or, occasionally, the family dog. If he happens to be a baronet, so you wait, and while you do, you try not to look like a man whose cravat is choking the joy out of him. Eventually, you're granted your opportunity. You bow, correct angle, not too deep, and ask for the honor of a dance. She accepts with a nod, then delicately writes your name into her dance card, a small, decorative booklet she wears on a ribbon around her wrist. It's already filling up. Some girls carry multiple cards if they're especially popular. Others scribble fake names to avoid unwanted invitations. You line up. The music starts. You're dancing, except it doesn't feel like dancing. It feels like steering a ship made entirely of social expectation. The steps are intricate. Your gloves are already damp. Her skirt brushes your ankle every now and then and you're terrified someone's going to see and declare a duel, but you survive. You twirl, you glide, you stumble only once, and thankfully, not into the Duchess's knees. Your partner says something lightly teasing about your rhythm. You make a joke about how your dance instructor was an ex-naval officer who treated every misstep as mutiny. She laughs. Genuinely. You feel like a champion, then the music ends, you bow again, she curtsies. And you escort her to the side of the room like the gentleman you are. You don't hover. Hovering is frowned upon. You disappear into the crowd of satin and brocade, heart racing, mind reeling with every detail of that short but dizzying interaction. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you: Victorian dances were choreographed with militaristic precision. A young lady was not to accept more than 2 dances from the same gentleman. A third? That was basically a public announcement of courtship, followed shortly by inquiries into your family's financial standing and any incidents involving horses or mental instability. You could, of course, try to engineer another dance by appealing to mutual acquaintances. Or asking someone's mother if they'd mind terribly arranging it. But everything had to be polite, indirect, and clearly sanctioned. This was romance under glass, beautiful, untouchable, and just a little suffocating. Historians still argue whether Victorian ballroom culture promoted genuine connection or simply rewarded the socially nimble. It's hard to say. But there's no doubt that how you danced, and who you danced with, could make or break your reputation. Trip once, and it might be chalked up to nerves. Trip twice, and someone's aunt might call you vexingly uncoordinated. Now let's talk about the room itself. Ballrooms weren't just venues, they were theaters. Every pair on the floor is being watched. Dances like the quadrille, the polka, and the waltz weren't just fun, they were performances of grace, etiquette, and unspoken desire. To stumble in public was to commit a small social crime, and waltzing, in particular, was controversial. Though popular by the mid-19th century, it still drew side eyes from certain quarters. Why? Because of how close you stood. Scandalously close, some said. A man's hand on a woman's back. Her hand on his shoulder. They might as well be French, still, the waltz survived. And flourished. Because once you learned the steps and swallowed your nerves. It really was romantic. Spinning across a polished floor to the strains of Strauss, knowing everyone's watching but still pretending it's just the two of you. It's intoxicating, of course, not every moment is graceful, you might bump someone. Forget a turn. Or, God forbid, accidentally tread on a hemline. And if you do, remember to apologize immediately, twice, and preferably with a reference to your personal shame. Something like, I shall never again trust these traitorous boots, Miss Eliza. That usually does the trick. Now for a fun, slightly unhinged tidbit, some young men took to rehearsing their ballroom small talk in front of mirrors, practicing phrases like what a divine waltz. Or do you favor the French fashion in gloves? While tilting their heads at appealing angles. Entire evenings could be undone by a poorly phrased compliment, and then there's the refreshments room. After a few dances, you might offer to escort a young lady to the side room for a glass of punch and a breath of air. This is both an honor and a minefield. For one, you must never suggest she needs rest, that's rude. Instead, you gently suggest you are in need of refreshment and would be honored by her company. If she agrees, you move as if under royal watch. No touching. No leading her by the hand. Just a polite arm offered and accepted with exactly the right angle of wrist. The punch, by the way, might be subtly spiked, depending on the host's generosity and tolerance for chaos. But most of the time, it's just cold tea pretending to be something more exciting. You talk for a few minutes. She mentions she loves Italian opera. You confess you once mistook Rigoletto for a new kind of pastry. She laughs again. You're doing well, but the moment ends. Always too soon, she's due to dance with another partner. You thank her. She thanks you. You bow. She curtsies. You return to the edge of the room, where unmarried men are instructed to loiter awkwardly near a table of lukewarm lemonade until summoned again. Ballroom etiquette doesn't allow for follow-up. You don't chase after her. You don't hover outside the ladies' retiring room. You wait. Or you ask her mother later if another dance might be permitted at the next event. Maybe, but for now, you stand there, slightly breathless, collar slightly askew, gloves slightly damp, and try to remember what exactly she said about Verdi. Or was it Puccini? You survived a dance. Perhaps even impressed her. But this is Victorian dating, where every victory is immediately followed by another challenge. There will be more dances. More cards. More partners. You might catch her eye again. You might not, but for a few minutes, between the cello and the chandeliers. You were part of something almost too elegant to be real. You find yourself standing just outside the house again, this time gripping not a bouquet or a dance card, but something far more intimate, and far more dangerous, a letter, not just any letter. A personal letter. Maybe you've written it yourself, after hours spent choosing the right phrases, the correct paper, and whether or not to include your initials in the wax seal. Or maybe it's one she has sent you, folded neatly, tucked inside a book, or slipped your way with the help of a sympathetic servant or an unusually lax chaperone. Either way, you're in the next phase of courtship now, the phase where words, finally, start to appear. But even here, you are walking a tightrope of ink and expectation. Because Victorian letter writing wasn't just about saying what you felt. It was about saying it in the most careful, coded, and utterly non-ruinous way possible. You couldn't simply scribble, "I like you." You had to craft something like, "The memory of our recent conversation concerning the merits of late-blooming chrysanthemums has lingered with remarkable tenacity." That's Victorian for "I can't stop thinking about you." And you'd better watch your tone. Too cool, and you seem disinterested. Too warm, and you're practically proposing. That's the power of a comma placement in 1874, the paper you choose matters, too. Cheap stationery. Insulting. Heavily perfumed. Too forward. Pale blue was fashionable. Cream was safe. Lavender, risky. Folded once, casual. Folded thrice and tied with ribbon, statement. And heaven help you if your handwriting is illegible. Calligraphy tutors made good money off the heartsick. Victorian letterwriting was a full-time emotional labor disguised as leisure. Every word, every curl of ink, was loaded. Still, this is where real connections were forged. When you were away from prying eyes and could finally say what you'd been swallowing behind polite nods and flower metaphors, at least, you could say it, if you dared. But first, protocol. If you're a man writing to a lady, you must first have permission to correspond. Either directly granted by her parents, or delicately implied through social signals, an encouraging smile, an invitation to a family outing, or a chaperone who starts coughing in a less accusatory tone. Only then can you put pen to paper. You open with a salutation. "My dear Miss Fortescue" is safe. "Dearest" is too much. "Beloved" is only acceptable if an engagement has already occurred, or if you wish to start a scandal before Tuesday, then the body of the letter. You might discuss recent social events, comment on the weather, or express concern that she's been walking too often in the East Garden where the air is entirely too damp. Subtle concern. Care. No overt desire. At least not yet. If you're feeling brave, you might include a poem, your own, if you're foolish, or someone else's if you're wise. Just make sure it's not too romantic. Shelley is fine. Byron, questionable. Anything French? Forget it. Historians still argue whether Victorian lovers were genuinely shy, or simply constrained by layers upon layers of rules. One camp believes they found clever ways around them, hiding poems inside letters about laundry. The other insists that repression was so thorough that many couples didn't even hold hands until their wedding day. Perhaps both are true. But either way, your letter matters. It's your voice. Unsupervised. The one place you can risk a joke, or a gentle metaphor, or, dare we say it, a memory from the dance. A sentence that reads, "The lilt of the fourth movement reminded me of your smile." She'll read that sentence 3 times. She'll blush. She might press the paper to her lips. Or she might hand it straight to her mother, who reads it with a monocle and frowns at the unnecessary flourish. And now the quirky tidbit you didn't expect: there were entire books dedicated to model love letters. Yes. Guides like The Lover's Letter Writer or A Gentleman's Epistolary Assistant offered pre-written templates for every possible occasion: admiration, apology, proposal, or regret. It was, essentially, Victorian copy-paste. Some people used them verbatim. Others adapted the phrases. But many young lovers, especially those with less schooling, relied heavily on these guides, resulting in romantic exchanges that sounded suspiciously identical across entire neighborhoods. But the best letters were always the real ones. The slightly awkward, overly polite, sweetly fumbling ones. The kind where your sentence structure crumbles just a little when you're trying to express something honest. Where you say too much, then backtrack with, "I hope my tone has not overstepped the bounds of what is proper." It has. But she'll love it anyway. Of course, there are risks. Letters could be intercepted by jealous siblings, nosy maids, the family parrot. And once intercepted, they might be read aloud at breakfast, quoted in drawing rooms, or, most terrifyingly, returned with corrections. To mitigate this, many lovers developed secret codes. Some disguised their letters inside innocuous envelopes labeled tailor's invoice or receipts, not urgent. Others used invisible ink made from lemon juice or milk. Hold the letter to a flame and a second message would appear, usually something breathless like "I await Thursday with agony." And some got even more creative. They used acrostics, the first letter of each sentence spelling out a secret phrase. Or they wrote on the backs of shared sheet music, the love note nestled between crescendos and allegros. You, for instance, might hand her a page of Chopin with a faint pencil note under the G clef. Your presence would turn even this melancholy nocturne to joy. A little over the top. Perhaps. But this was the golden age of sentimentality. The Victorians were allergic to bluntness but addicted to longing. Now imagine this: you receive a reply. It's written in delicate script, sealed with a modest MF monogram, and dusted with just enough powder to suggest care, not vanity. You open it with trembling fingers. She thanks you for your kind sentiments. She says your thoughts on the primroses were most diverting. She's reread your poem twice. And she closes with, "I, too, found the fourth movement charming." And that's it, but that's everything. You sit there with the letter in your hands, heart thudding, reading the last sentence over and over. In a world where a glance takes months, where a touch might never come, that tiny phrase is a lightning strike. Of course, you write back. Perhaps a little faster than is dignified. And so it begins, a slow, gentle volley of letters, exchanged under careful watch but brimming with things neither of you are allowed to say aloud. Days pass between each one. Sometimes weeks. You wait by the post. You compose your replies late at night. And though no promises have been made, the tone shifts. From formal to fond. From fond to familiar, and now, as you hold her latest letter, a thin, folded thing sealed with blue wax, you notice she's used your given name, just once, just in passing, but once is enough, because in this world of lace and rules and endless waiting, even the smallest shift in language can feel like the start of something vast. You fold the letter carefully. Press it into a book. Maybe Middlemarch. You'll remember the page forever, and tomorrow, you'll write again. You're staring at a shop window now, its glass slightly fogged from the summer humidity, its shelves lined with silver brushes, cameo brooches, ivory-handled fans, and embroidered handkerchiefs. Because today, you're not just a hopeful suitor. Today, you are a gift giver. And that, in the Victorian world, is a perilous thing, in an era where simply handing someone a flower could spark weeks of gossip. Offering a tangible object, a physical item she might keep, touch, or display. That's an entire social performance with rules, consequences, and the looming specter of impropriety. You wouldn't think a fan could destroy your reputation. But oh, it can. Welcome to the highly strategic battlefield of Victorian courtship gifts, where a single glove might whisper romance. And a poorly chosen trinket might scream scandal. First things first, you don't give gifts without context. Ever. Not even a sentimental pencil stub. A man might present a lady with a token only after they've reached a socially sanctioned stage of acquaintance, one that has been blessed, or at least tolerated, by her parents, her chaperone, her cat, and her social circle. Even then, the gift must be appropriate. By which we mean, utterly harmless, modestly priced, symbolically innocent, and small enough to fit inside a sewing box. No jewelry, unless you're engaged. Not even earrings. In fact, offering a ring too soon was so presumptuous, it could spark a family feud. Necklaces. Positively risque. Only husbands gave necklaces. And those were usually pearls, handed over with the solemnity of a papal ceremony, so, you're stuck with safer options. A beautifully bound volume of poetry, perhaps. Not too romantic, maybe Cooper, never Byron. Or a box of writing paper with her initials embossed in gold. Thoughtful. Elegant. Distant, fans were a classic choice. Lacy, hand-painted, and collapsible. They could be used in the drawing room, at the theater, at balls, everywhere a young lady might want to look sophisticated while also conveying secret messages through the universal language of fan fluttering. Yes, that's a real thing. According to some sources, though historians still argue whether anyone actually followed it, Victorian ladies were rumored to use fans for subtle communication. A closed fan resting on the right cheek meant yes. On the left? No. A fan dropped on the floor meant I'm yours. Or maybe just oops. Either way, the fan had flair. You might also consider a handkerchief, daintily embroidered with her initials. Not yours, yours would be far too bold. But a handkerchief hinted at shared familiarity. Plus, in a world where sniffles were both common and terribly romanticized, it was a practical gesture with just a touch of intimacy. Some daring suitors gifted pressed flowers in glass lockets, tokens that combined the poetry of florography with the permanence of jewelry, minus the threat of actual gemstones. A violet from a shared walk. A snowdrop she admired in the conservatory. Encased forever, like a tiny, tasteful time capsule of affection, but again, caution rules everything, because even the act of giving can be interpreted. Delivering the gift in person. Far too forward. Unless you're already halfway to a proposal. Most of the time. You'd send it via post, or through a servant, or, if you're very lucky and quite bold, have it handed off during a dance by way of an intermediary. A cousin, perhaps. Cousins are endlessly useful in Victorian romance, and what about the response? If she keeps the gift, that's good. Very good. If she sends it back, neatly rewrapped with a brief but blistering note about inappropriate familiarity, then congratulations, you've just fast-tracked yourself to bachelorhood. Worse still, if she accepts it but doesn't use it. That fan you gave? It's never brought to the theater. That book of poetry? Gathering dust on the third shelf. It's her way of saying, thank you, but please return to the foggy abyss from whence you came. Now imagine you've chosen well, you've sent a volume of Keats, carefully selected for its balance of elegance and restraint. You've even marked a passage with a pressed sprig of lavender, a subtle nod to your earlier bouquet. The book arrives, and a week later, you see it on her side table during a chaperone visit. She mentions having read it. Twice, she even quotes a line, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever," and glances up at you, the tiniest curl at the corner of her mouth. You feel a blush rising. You pretend to be deeply interested in the tassels on a nearby cushion. Victory, of course, not all gifts go so smoothly. Quirky fact incoming: some overeager suitors attempted to show affection by sending exotic animals. Tiny monkeys. Parrots. A particularly misguided Frenchman once attempted to impress an heiress by sending her a small, deeply unhappy crocodile. It ended up in the fountain. The courtship did not progress. Even acceptable gifts could be risky. A set of embroidered gloves, for example, might seem charming. But if the stitching includes a heart or, heaven forbid, your initials, that glove transforms instantly into a presumptuous declaration. She might wear them once, at a family picnic, just to keep her aunt from asking questions. But they'll never see the inside of the drawing room again, and if you're the one receiving a gift, well, congratulations. It means something. Maybe not much. Maybe everything. She might send you a bookmark she stitched herself. Or a ribbon left behind after a theater outing. Or a small embroidered sachet of dried herbs, lavender for calm, rosemary for memory, mint for freshness. You'll place it in your coat pocket and carry it around like it's a holy relic. You don't display it, of course. That would be unseemly. But you check your pocket 5 times a day to make sure it's still there. Now here's a small, strange practice. Victorian lovers sometimes exchanged locks of hair. Yes, actual hair. Often coiled and sealed in lockets or even braided into miniature rings and brooches. It sounds macabre now, but back then it was a cherished gesture, tangible, lasting, and deeply personal. You might pluck a curl from your own head, wrap it in tissue, and seal it with wax. You'd include a note, a trifle, but a true one. She might reply with a snippet of her own hair, tied with a pale blue ribbon, and you would treasure it forever. Or until your valet found it and had a quiet existential crisis. These tokens, modest, intimate, and painfully formal, were the closest most Victorian couples came to physical closeness before engagement. A gifted book. A stitched sachet. A pressed flower. A silken ribbon that once touched her hair, each gift, a placeholder. Each one, a whispered hope. Historians still argue whether these exchanges created more meaningful bonds or simply prolonged the agony of courtship. But many agree, the delayed gratification, the need to interpret every object like a love sonnet, created a kind of emotional intensity modern dating rarely achieves. After all, if you've waited 6 weeks to give her a small fan, and she unfolds it at the next garden party and uses it just once in your direction, well, that means more than 1,000 hastily texted emojis. So now you're here again, at the shop window, watching the clerk arrange ribbon-tied parcels behind the glass. A new shipment of ivory combs has just arrived. You consider purchasing one, but hesitate. Is it too forward? Too personal? Too easily misinterpreted? You step inside anyway, not because you're sure, but because, in this world of velvet, fan flutters, and love disguised as politeness, you've begun to understand how to speak without speaking, and you think, perhaps, she's listening. You're walking now, not along a windswept moor or the gravel path of some candlelit estate, but through the bustling, smoky, slightly damp streets of town. A light drizzle stains the brim of your hat. The air smells of coal soot and horse sweat. And still, somehow, you feel alive. Why? Because today, you're going on a supervised outing. Yes, dear listener, we've reached the milestone of the Victorian public rendezvous, the subtle, orchestrated dance of getting to spend time with someone you're interested in. While being constantly monitored for signs of moral decay, you'd think a walk in the park would be simple. It is not. In Victorian England, even being seen together in public was a coded message. A young man and a young woman walking side by side, without chaperone or family escort. That's enough to spark rumors, provoke gossip, and possibly summon the wrath of the local vicar. So what do? You invite her, with the proper permissions, to take a stroll. Accompanied, of course. Most likely by her mother, her aunt, or a stern cousin named Prudence who once reported a fellow for wearing trousers that were too French. Today, your destination is Hyde Park. It's one of the few places in London where young people can stretch their legs and their social possibilities. You meet near the gate. She arrives on time, in a walking dress of dark blue, complete with gloves and a modest parasol. Her chaperone walks precisely 3 feet behind at all times, close enough to hear every syllable, far enough to pretend she's admiring the geranium beds. You offer your arm. She accepts, barely touching you. And off you go. The public promenade was the Victorian version of speed dating, only slower and with far more duck ponds. You talk about the weather, which is never good. You discuss the newspapers, but only the appropriate bits. You avoid politics, religion, and anything involving art that might include visible ankles, and still, this walk is thrilling. Because she's with you. Because she could have declined. Because she wore the brooch you remember from the last dance, and surely that means something. Doesn't it? Occasionally, her chaperone pretends to become engrossed in a fountain or a plaque, giving you a few uninterrupted steps. You use them wisely. A well-timed compliment. A shared laugh. Maybe even a reference to the letter you sent last week. She smiles. A real smile. And that's your reward, but don't get too comfortable. At no point can you wander off. At no point can you remove your gloves. At no point can she refer to you by your first name unless she's about to marry you or argue about your will. Even a quick rest on a bench is a high-stakes moment. If you sit too close, her chaperone clears her throat. If you sit too far, she might think you've lost interest. So you settle for the golden rule of Victorian courtship posture: lean slightly, smile faintly, speak softly, and don't stare. Nothing says, future scandal, quite like a lingering gaze over the rim of your hat. Still, this walk serves a crucial purpose. It tests compatibility, because love letters are lovely, and dances are charming, but do you both walk at the same pace? Can you make conversation without a script? Does she flinch when you mention cricket? Does she laugh at your best comparison between Queen Victoria and an unusually determined house cat? Victorian outings were often the first time couples could observe each other as people. Not just as polished social performances. Now for a quirky bit you didn't expect, some families timed these outings with stopwatches. Yes, really. In more anxious households, mothers would allow their daughters exactly 20 minutes of strolling conversation before calling things off with a fluttered "well, how refreshing," and leading them back to the carriage like a royal procession. And these walks weren't just for the park. You might be invited to accompany the family on a visit to the Crystal Palace, or the British Museum, or if you're very lucky, to the Zoological Gardens. Imagine courting someone while standing 10 feet from a goat that's chewing a bough off your boot. Zoos were oddly popular courting venues. Maybe because they allowed just enough unpredictability to make a day interesting. You could bond over monkeys. Laugh at parrots. Pretend not to blush when a tiger's roar makes her grab your sleeve for half a second. Historians still debate whether these outings created genuine intimacy or just prolonged the agony of delayed declarations. But there's one thing we know for sure: everyone was watching. Not just the chaperone. But other walkers. Other families. That nosy woman who used to be your piano teacher and now exists solely to critique your posture. Each one judging your every glance, word, and gesture for signs of either respectable affection or impending doom. but sometimes, just sometimes, the outing includes something magical, rain, yes. Rain, because rain changes things. It softens the boundaries. Suddenly, parasols are no longer enough. A gentleman must offer his umbrella. He must lean slightly closer to ensure she doesn't get soaked. He might remove his coat and place it over a puddle, though real puddle coat chivalry was rarer than novels would have you believe. Still, the image remains. Two young people huddled beneath an umbrella, their steps matching in the wet gravel, their laughter echoing in the mist, and for those few rain-dappled minutes, it almost feels like the chaperone disappears. Later, you walk her home. Not alone, of course. Always with company. But when you reach the garden gate, and she turns slightly to say, "I enjoyed our walk very much," the moment still lands like thunder in your chest. You tip your hat. You smile. You say, "It was the finest part of my day." You want to say more. But you don't. You walk away, coat damp, boots muddied, heart loudly echoing the rhythm of your steps. Later that night, you sit at your writing desk. You begin a letter. You describe the way the roses looked after the rain. You mention the peacock at the zoo. You casually reference that moment when she laughed at your comment about the emu's resemblance to your old schoolmaster, and then, only then, you say, "I hope our next walk comes sooner than the last." You seal the letter with a sigh and hope the postboy doesn't crumple it in his pocket, because in this world of umbrellas and unsaid things, a walk isn't just a walk. It's a declaration disguised as exercise. A memory shaped like motion. A moment that tells her, with every careful step, "I like being beside you, even when it rains." You're seated now, stiff-backed and slightly overwarmed, in a drawing room that smells faintly of lemon polish and someone's lingering rosewater perfume. The windows are open just enough to admit a lazy afternoon breeze, and you've been handed a delicate porcelain teacup that you are absolutely terrified of dropping. Congratulations. You've been invited to tea, not the casual come in, have a biscuit sort of tea. No. This is Victorian afternoon tea in the home of a young lady you may or may not someday propose to, which means it's not about hydration, or even cake. It's about performance, social performance. Familial presentation. And the very fine art of appearing charming while navigating three-tiered pastry stands under the direct gaze of at least two relatives and one disapproving parent. You're here because you've earned a certain amount of trust. She's spoken of you positively. Or neutrally. Or, if you've been dancing circles around your own shyness, she's not spoken of you at all, which has piqued the curiosity of her mother. Either way, you're in the parlor now, and the social machinery has begun. Afternoon tea is no small ritual in this house. The silver is polished. The doilies have been ironed. The biscuits are arranged in such deliberate symmetry, you suspect they were placed with tweezers. And at the center of it all is her, gloved, coiffed, demure, and pouring your tea as if this is all the most natural thing in the world. It isn't, because while this might look like a simple gathering, this is actually a soft interrogation. The mother offers you cucumber sandwiches. The aunt asks if you enjoy Tennyson. The cousin pretends to nap in the corner, but you know she's memorizing your every sentence for the family gossip circuit. This is the Victorian equivalent of being interviewed by a panel. A panel with cake, and you must perform. But carefully, you're witty, but not silly. Educated, but not arrogant. Complimentary, but not flirtatious. And under no circumstances must you show a preference for jam over clotted cream, unless she does, then you like it very much. Thank you. This tea is also a chance to be seen in her domestic sphere. You note the embroidery on the chair backs. The tidy arrangement of music sheets on the piano. The way she's placed a vase of sweet peas by the window. Every detail offers a peek into her world, and every glance from her family offers a reminder that they're gauging whether you'd fit into it. Historians still argue whether these visits were meant to encourage intimacy or to reinforce distance. Either way, they were common, necessary, even. You couldn't propose without ever seeing how she arranged her sugar tongs. That would be madness. Now for a lovely fringe detail, teacup handles were socially coded, yes. Truly, you're meant to hold your cup with the thumb and index finger through the handle, never hooking it like a mug. Pinkies are not to be extended, despite popular caricature, and you must never, ever slurp. The teaspoon rests silently on the saucer. Stir without clinking. Sip without sighing. You are not a kettle. You are a gentleman, and then there's the conversation. It wanders gently from books to weather to possibly a recent sermon or charity bazaar. You listen attentively, nod at the right places, and try not to over-contribute. You're being measured not just for your wit but your restraint. But then, in a brief moment, when her mother steps out to fetch more sugar, and the cousin pretends to be very interested in a portrait, you find yourself speaking alone. It's brief. 10 seconds. 20, she smiles. You mention how lovely the rose garden looked as you arrived, she nods. They were my late grandmother's favorite. There it is. A flicker. A personal thread tugged loose from the tapestry of polite conversation. You don't say more. You let the moment rest. Later, when everyone is back in their places, you help serve the scones. You offer to pour the next round of tea. And when her father joins in with a joke about some local MP, you manage to laugh appropriately, even though you have absolutely no idea who the man is, because now, you're not just courting her. You're courting all of them. Let's talk snacks, briefly. Because tea wasn't just tea. It was a small architectural feat of delicacies, scones with currant, crumpets glistening with butter, thin slices of cake, and sandwiches so minimal they seemed like culinary whispers, and everything you touched was a test. If you declined food, rude. If you took too much, greedy. If you asked what was in something, suspicious. So you smile, you nod, you nibble like you've trained for it. Sometimes, families use these visits to display wealth or taste. Imported teas, fine china, a footman or two to pour milk. But others took pride in simplicity, a well-baked seed cake and a warm room meant to say, we are decent folk. You must navigate both styles with equal grace. You must never look impressed. Never look disappointed. You are Switzerland, with a cravat, and then, of course, there's the piano. At some point, she's asked to play. Maybe something by Mendelssohn. Maybe a folk song. She demurs, briefly. Pretends to be reluctant. But she plays, and it's lovely, not because the notes are perfect, though they probably are, but because this is her in motion. In art, in sound. For a few minutes, you see her not as a miss or a future prospect, but as a whole person with rhythms and melodies you've never heard before. If you are clever and confident, you might offer to turn the pages. But only if your hands are steady and your knees won't betray you by knocking over the bench. After the music, there's a brief pause. Someone refills the cream. A clock ticks. The fire crackles slightly even though it's mid-May, and then, quietly, tea ends. The tray is removed. The plates are cleared. You rise. You thank the family. You nod respectfully to the cousin, the parrot, the wisteria creeping across the window, and then you turn to her. You bow slightly. Thank you, Miss Fairburn. It was all lovely. She meets your gaze. I'm so glad you came. That's it. No touch. No lingering farewell. Just that sentence. You step out into the street. The day is the same. The drizzle returns. But you feel different, because now, you've been inside, you've seen her world. The cushions she picked. The flowers she arranged. The piano she plays not because she must, but because she wants to, and she welcomed you into it, maybe not openly. Not yet, but enough. Now for a final quirky fact, some Victorian gentlemen kept tiny journals just for tea visits. They'd write down what she served, what she wore, what she said about Tennyson, what color the parlor wallpaper was. Because memory, in courtship, was everything. And being able to mention her favorite flower 2 weeks later wasn't just clever, it was intentionality. And intentionality, in the age of arranged marriages and social maneuvering, was as close to love as you could safely admit. So tonight, you return home. You change your collar. You sit down. And you open your own little notebook. You write, she poured the tea herself. Chose lemon over milk. Mentioned roses. Played Debussy. Laughed when I dropped a crumb. Said she was glad I came. You close the notebook. You smile, because, slowly and very gently, you're being let in. You're pacing again, but this time, it's not the garden or the parlor, it's your own bedroom, a stack of letters and calling cards fanned across your desk, the tip of your boot tapping against the floorboards. You're rehearsing lines in your head. Not for a sonnet, or a speech, or some clever witticism over tea, no, tonight you're preparing for something far more harrowing, a dinner invitation, not a ball. Not an afternoon stroll. This is the full dress, sit down, silver polished, reputation on the line formal dinner, hosted by her family, with you as the nervous centerpiece. If tea was a polite test, this is a trial by candlelight, and everything matters, your appearance, for starters. You must arrive perfectly groomed, in evening attire suitable to your station. Not too flashy, not too modest. Gloves, yes. A proper cravat, symmetrical, subdued, not flamboyant. Your boots polished to a mirror sheen. One hair out of place and the butler will look at you like you've just tracked mud into the throne room. You arrive precisely on time. Not early, heaven forbid. Not late, social death. You knock, and the door opens with the hush of servants who've been told to observe you but not too obviously. You're shown into the drawing room first. She's there, of course. Looking radiant in a gown that suggests care but not excess. Her mother is seated nearby, already evaluating your posture. Her father offers a polite but cool greeting, the sort of good evening that includes 17 subtexts about property, morality, and whether your waistcoat is tailored too tightly. Small talk ensues. You navigate it with care, like walking across iced-over cobblestones. You mention the latest parliamentary scandal, but only vaguely. You say you've been reading Macaulay, which you have. At least the first page. You compliment the furnishings, just enough, and then the bell chimes, dinner is served, you're led into the dining room. It's a long table, covered in gleaming silver, bone china, and enough glassware to signal a deep commitment to hydration. Candles flicker in ornate holders. A centerpiece of fresh-cut lilies fills the air with a cloying sweetness you're too nervous to notice. Your place has been marked. You are not at the head, of course not, but not quite at the far end, either. You're in the sweet spot, close enough to her for conversation, but distant enough to prevent scandal. You sit, and then the choreography begins, because Victorian dinner etiquette is not eating. It is performing the illusion of eating while conducting a wordless ballet of civility. You unfold your napkin, onto your lap. Not your collar. You do not begin to eat first. You wait for the hostess. Always. If soup is served, you spoon away from yourself. Always. You butter your bread discreetly, never fully tearing it in half like a medieval peasant, and you do not speak with your mouth full. Unless it's an emergency, like catching fire, conversation happens in pockets. She might turn to you during the fish course, offering a quiet comment about the sauce. You respond lightly, never too eager. You don't dominate. You don't whisper. And you never, ever bring up anything French that isn't cuisine or lace, but what you do say, matters. This is one of the few courtship stages where the conversation can move from pleasantries to something almost meaningful. She asks about your interests. You mention sketching, perhaps, or music. Nothing too controversial. She asks if you've read the latest serial in the Cornhill magazine. You have. Or you pretend you have. She talks about the charity hospital her aunt supports. You nod with solemn interest and ask a follow-up question that shows compassion but not meddling. Meanwhile, her father is watching you like a hawk. Every opinion you express, every adjective you choose, every moment you lean a little too close when responding, it's all catalogued. And speaking of cataloging, some Victorian households assigned unofficial courtship scores after such dinners. Yes. Aunts and grandmothers kept quiet little ledgers, noting things like, ate with restraint. Spoke kindly of chamber music. Used correct fish fork. Did not fidget. Laughed too loudly at Harriet's joke. Suspect nerves. Historians still debate whether these scorecards were real or just gossip fodder. But the tradition of reporting back. Absolutely real. After dinner, there's a brief pause, the liminal moment before the drawing room. You rise with the men as the ladies exit. You bow, of course. She meets your eyes, just once. You think, was that a smile, but the door closes too quickly. Now, you're left with cigars, port, and the company of men with opinions. Her father steers the conversation toward property law. You listen. You contribute. You survive. Eventually, the group reconvenes in the drawing room. She's playing the piano again. This time, something more daring, perhaps a Liszt transcription or a Hungarian dance. The fire crackles. Glasses clink. And you feel, oddly, almost at ease. You chat with her mother. She comments on the weather. You agree it's been quite changeable. She approves of your vocabulary. Then, just before you depart, something rare occurs. Her father offers to walk you to the door himself. He says, lightly, you'll be joining us for the garden fête next week. I hope. Which means, you did well. You make your way home under the gas lamps, the city slicked with recent rain. You remove your gloves with theatrical delicacy, as if you're still being watched. And maybe you are, in a way, because now, you've made it to stage 5 of Victorian courtship, the formal dinner. From here, things become clearer. Not easier, but clearer. You are known now. You are on record, and somewhere, she's sitting in her room, brushing her hair and remembering how you didn't flinch when her cousin dropped a fork. Now for the unexpected tidbit. There was an etiquette guide in 1872 that advised young gentlemen to rehearse small anecdotes before formal dinners, ideally involving harmless humor, light travel disasters, or animal mishaps. One sample entry read, if short of stories, refer to a cow lost during youth, but omit any mention of injury or udder. You didn't have to use a cow anecdote tonight. But you were ready. And that readiness? That matters, because now, your name will be mentioned at breakfast tomorrow. And when it is, someone will smile. Someone will raise an eyebrow. Someone will say, he managed not to insult Aunt Matilda. That's something. And she? She will stay quiet, but she'll remember. And next week, at the garden fête, she'll wear a ribbon in the same color as your cravat tonight, just for you. You're standing on clipped grass now, sunlight dappling your hat, the scent of roses and fresh earth drifting on a gentle afternoon breeze. Someone is laughing softly near the lemon cakes. A dog is politely being shooed away from the cold roast beef. There's a string quartet under a white pavilion, and across the lawn, gliding in a gown the color of tea roses, she is smiling at someone else's joke. Welcome to the Victorian garden fête, the open-air arena of subtle declarations, veiled flirtations, and social maneuvering hidden behind fans, fruit punch, and a suspiciously competitive game of croquet. You've been invited, which already signals progress. You're not just a passing acquaintance anymore, you're part of the guest list. Your name was written in ink, perhaps even underlined. And you've arrived properly dressed, pale gloves, light coat, waistcoat not too dark, because this is a daytime affair and, as you've learned by now, even sunlight has rules. Everything here is beautiful. Pastoral. Serene, which is to say, absolutely treacherous, because beneath the linen tablecloths and rose-printed parasols lies the sharp, unrelenting buzz of social awareness. People are watching you. Listening. Judging, but unlike a formal dinner or a parlor tea, the garden fête has movement. And movement, dear listener, means opportunity. You're no longer stuck in a chair under Aunt Edwina's scrutiny. You can stroll. Drift. Find yourself accidentally near her as she approaches the lemonade. Compliment her hat. Laugh at the same terrible pun from Reverend Chippingworth. It's a dance, one without music, but just as choreographed. Of course, you must first greet the hosts. Shake hands. Compliment the marigolds. Pretend you understand how Lady Pennington's azaleas differ from Lord Pembroke's. You do not, but you nod wisely and say, indeed, the soil on this side of the river is far superior. Soon enough, you're circulating. There's a table of trifles and sponge cakes, a game of battledore and shuttlecock being played far too competitively by two clergymen, and of course, the croquet lawn. Croquet, in Victorian England, was less about sport and more about tension. It gave couples something to do while speaking in half-truths. It allowed for little moments, a shared smile over a missed shot, a whispered apology when you accidentally knock her ball into the hedgerow. Today, she invites you to play. Your mallet feels heavier than it should. Her cousin is already smirking, likely planning to accidentally sabotage your turn. The aunt pretends not to watch, but her embroidery needle is trembling from attention. You strike. It's fine. Respectable. She smiles, and then she takes her turn, delicately, precisely, perfectly. You applaud, softly. This game continues for 20 minutes. You say things like, an excellent shot, Miss Fairburn, and she replies with, you're far too kind, Mr. The honorifics remain. But the air between you is warmer. You're both testing the limits of propriety, nudging the edges of what's allowed. At one point, your gloved hands brush. Only slightly. Only briefly. But the breath you both draw afterward feels like the first one in hours. Historians still argue whether croquet was actually popular for its entertainment value or merely tolerated for its ability to create moments like this. One camp insists it was a flirtation engine, the other sees it as a cleverly disguised social prison, but today? It's liberation. After the game, you both retreat to the shade. There's a table set with syllabub and fruit jellies. You serve her, of course. She chooses gooseberry. You follow suit, and now the conversation opens up. It's still delicate. Still under observation. But here, in the garden, you can speak a little more freely. There's space between topics. The breeze covers part of your reply, which lets her lean closer and say, pardon. You talk about music. The Conservatory. That play you both read. And when she says something self-deprecating, you say gently, I've never heard you speak so modestly of something you do so well. It's a line that would feel overblown indoors. But out here, in the filtered sunlight, it lands, and she looks away, just slightly, and smiles. Now, for your required quirky tidbit, some garden fêtes included fortune booths, where guests would line up to have their palms read by a local spinster or a cousin in a silk shawl pretending to be a Roma mystic. It was all in fun, of course. But many couples used these booths to test the waters, holding hands for reading purposes. Smiling at predictions of a tall dark stranger, and using the occasion to exchange playful glances that might have been forbidden elsewhere. Today, the fortune booth is run by her aunt. You approach together, laughing. You offer your palm first. The aunt peers at it. Ah, she says. A man of letters. And of considerable patience. You glance at her. She raises one eyebrow, then your companion places her glove on the table. The aunt takes her hand, studies it. Well. This line here suggests a visitor. Who comes often, but never outstays his welcome. Everyone chuckles, your cheeks warm, the aunt winks. It's a joke, of course. But it's also not, because now, as the sun lowers and the shadows stretch longer across the croquet lawn, the mood shifts from public formality to something almost intimate. You find yourselves walking again, this time not on gravel paths, but along the edge of the garden. The others are distracted with syllabub and gossip. Her chaperone is seated with a damp compress after too much sun, and for a brief, perfect moment, you are alone. No one can hear you. No one is watching. You both pause by a rose bush. She says quietly, I hope you've enjoyed the day. And you say, it's been the finest afternoon I can recall. There's a silence. Not awkward. Just suspended. She lifts her hand to adjust her parasol ribbon. You say, almost without planning, will I see you at St. Aldwyn's concert? She answers, if you'll be there. Which, of course, you now must be, and just as you begin to say more, her name, perhaps, or something braver, the chaperone appears around the corner, breathing slightly heavier, and says, time to return, my dear. The moment vanishes. But not completely, she walks ahead. You follow. But as you pass beneath the trellis, she turns, just for a second, and says, you do play a very honest game of croquet. It's a small thing, but again, in this world of measured affection and floral metaphors, it's everything. Later, you stand at the garden gate. You bid farewell. She curtsies. Her mother thanks you for attending. Her father nods once, approvingly, you tip your hat. Smile. And begin the walk home. Behind you, the fête continues. Laughter, violins, someone sneezing near the sponge cake. But in your chest, you carry a new weight, the beginning of something real, not certain. Not spoken, but real. That night, you write nothing. No letter. No poem. You're back indoors now, but it's no longer the formal hush of the drawing room or the echo of footsteps down a grand hallway. No, this space feels different, warmer, more personal. The chairs are a bit worn. There's a gentle fire crackling, casting orange flickers against the wall. And across from you, seated with a book in her lap, is the young woman you've spent weeks, perhaps months, orbiting like a planet around a quiet, careful sun. You're visiting her family library, a rare privilege, one not extended to every admirer who's passed through their garden gates or made polite conversation over teacups. This is her world now. You are in it, not as a suitor under scrutiny. Not as a name scrawled on a dance card. But as something approaching a friend. Don't misunderstand, nothing has been formalized. There's no engagement. No open declarations. But this? This is trust. Access. You've been allowed into a room where the books bear fingerprints, where the piano has clearly been played when no one was watching, where the paintings are family portraits instead of fashion statements. This is the intimate middle of Victorian courtship. That soft, uncertain space between cautious possibility and actual promise. She gestures for you to sit. You do. She offers tea, and you pour it, flawlessly, without clinking. She thanks you not with a nod, but with a smile that lasts just long enough to make your pulse shift. You ask about the book she's reading. It's a collection of essays. You admit, lightly, that you've never quite made it through more than 2. She laughs, not at you, but with a kind of relief. Like she's been pretending to adore them for the sake of her family and is grateful for someone who finds them a bit dry too. This is new. Shared honesty, and it grows. You talk about your childhood. A pet bird. That time you broke your arm climbing a tree you weren't supposed to. She admits she used to sneak into this very library after bedtime and read fairy tales by candlelight. Once, she nearly set the rug on fire. You both laugh. The fire crackles, and suddenly, without quite meaning to, you're telling her about something real, your older brother's disappointment when you didn't follow him into business. The way your mother always pushed for ambition, while your father just wanted you to be respectable. She listens. Truly listens, and when she speaks again, it's not about the weather or the latest operetta. It's about her own fears, how she's expected to marry well, but no one ever explained what well really means. How everyone assumes she'll host salons and preside over charities, but she sometimes wonders what it would be like to live in a small cottage and bake her own bread. It's not a declaration, but it's an opening, one you do not rush to fill. You simply nod, and say, that sounds lovely. And she smiles, not like she's flirting, but like she's been understood. Here's your fringe fact. Some Victorian couples developed secret shared bookshelves. Not literal ones, necessarily, but agreed upon titles. novels they both read, annotate, and refer to in letters. It was a way to talk about feelings without speaking them aloud. You suspect this might be happening now, because as you're about to leave, she says, before you go, there's something you might like. She rises, crosses the room, and retrieves a thin volume of poetry. She presses it into your hands. Let me know which verse you liked best. You bow slightly. Take the book. Say nothing more, because she already knows you will. As you walk home, the book feels weighty despite its slimness. The night is still. There's a softness in the fog, a hush in the cobblestones, like the city has paused just to let you think. You pause under a gas lamp for a moment, just to open the book. Your breath curls in the air. You flip through the pages slowly, almost reverently, as if each line might be carrying some hidden message, like an echo of her voice, folded between stanzas. And what you're thinking is this: you are no longer a stranger to her, you are not merely charming, or polite, or acceptably dressed, you are known, not fully. Not yet. But enough. The next few weeks fall into a rhythm: visits, letters, the occasional chance meeting at a museum or garden. Her mother still supervises. Her father still peers over his spectacles. But there's less resistance now. Less caution, because now the question has subtly shifted from is this man suitable to could this man stay? And you begin to notice it in small ways. When you arrive, she's already by the window. When you leave, she walks a few steps farther toward the door. She asks about your writing. She remembers the name of your childhood bird. She quotes back your comment about the dry essays, but now she teases you for it, as if you're co-authors in some private joke. Historians still argue whether these slow, layered phases of Victorian courtship created deeper relationships or simply prolonged the inevitable. Was all this ritual a foundation for real connection, or just theater? You no longer care, because what's developing now feels real. You feel it in the nervous thrill of your pen against parchment. You feel it in the flicker of her expression when she sees you before she's composed herself. You feel it in absence, how, when 3 days pass without seeing her, the air seems thinner. The city feels off-key, and then there's the moment, one you never planned. One that arrives like dusk, quietly, then all at once, you're in the library again. She's reading. You're reading. Her hand rests near yours on the armrest between you. You both reach for your teacups, your fingers touch, neither of you pulls away, not quickly. Not at all, and in that stillness, without speaking, without eye contact, without any permission from anyone else, you know, you are in love with her. You can't say it. Not yet, but she knows, and she does not flinch. The conversation resumes, lighter, but changed. There is something else now, something between the lines, beneath the glances, inside the pauses, a question forming, not will you marry me? Not yet, but what if I did? And that is enough to carry you through the next week. The next letter. The next long, gentle visit in a room warmed by fire and layered with books and trust. Now here's your quirky bit: some Victorian lovers developed coded bookmarks. They'd leave them sticking out at certain angles in shared books to signal feelings. A top right slant might mean I missed you. A folded corner at a particular poem meant I hope you noticed. You wonder, now, as you reopen the poetry volume she lent you, why one page is slightly creased. You read the verse: she walked in light, though clouds were drawn, and bore her silence like a fawn, a wordless grace, a glance well kept, and in his chest, a heartbeat leapt. You smile, you mark the same page, you fold it, just slightly, not enough to damage the paper, just enough to say yes. It begins with a letter, not a formal one. Not stiffly folded or wax-sealed. Just a modest envelope, hand-delivered by a servant who seems entirely unaware that he may as well be carrying your soul in his pocket. You open it slowly. Your fingers tremble, not out of fear, exactly, but because you've reached that tender, unbearable point of affection where anything she says matters. A comma might make you ache. A missing signature might unravel you. Inside is a short note, 3 lines, to be precise: I wondered if you might accompany us to the Botanical Conservatory this Thursday. there are new orchids in bloom, I thought of you. That last line, you sit down, and then you read it again. You're not entirely sure whether the I thought of you refers to the orchids themselves, or the conservatory, or perhaps the idea of shared beauty. But it doesn't matter. Because she thought of you. Unprompted. Voluntarily, you write a reply that evening, simple and measured. You confirm, graciously. You suggest a fondness for tropical blooms. You mention Thursday's forecast, lightly cloudy, excellent for indoor strolling, and then, you wait. When Thursday arrives, you're standing outside the glass dome of the conservatory 10 minutes early. It's a feat of modern engineering, curved iron ribs, gleaming panes, warm air rising from the heated stone paths. Through the misted glass. You can already glimpse flashes of green and brilliant red, ferns and hibiscus, palm fronds shivering under droplets of condensation. She arrives shortly after, with her mother in tow, and a cousin who seems determined to stare at Koi for the entire afternoon. You bow. She smiles. And just like that, you step into the soft, fragrant hothouse jungle of Victorian romance. Inside, the air smells like damp moss and sweetness. The orchids are truly extraordinary, riotous, alien things in all colors, with curling petals and shapes that seem half-invented. She pauses before one in soft gold, then leans in closer. You can't help but watch the way her gloved fingers rest against the edge of the planter, delicate as if touching something alive. You ask her favorite, she points. That one, there. The white with the violet heart. It looks like it's keeping a secret. You glance at it. And say, then I envy it. It takes her a second. Then she laughs, quietly, politely, with a glimmer that tells you she caught the meaning. Maybe even appreciated it. The cousin, still fixated on the koi, vanishes down a stone path. Her mother lingers nearby, conveniently examining a palm tree. You and she begin walking, slowly, past plants with impossible names, heliconia, passiflora, strange trailing vines with petals like paper lanterns. And all the while, the conversation deepens, not all at once. You still discuss trivial things, the color of the sky, the new pianist at Lady Winslow's salon, the way the orchids seem to glow from within. But layered beneath is something richer. She mentions, offhandedly, a family she knows, one whose daughter was recently engaged to a man with no passion at all. You don't press, but you say, that sounds like a quiet kind of tragedy. She turns to you, eyes thoughtful, and says, it's not the worst thing. But it's not the best either. You both know you're not talking about orchids anymore. Now for your mainstream historical fact, Victorian conservatories were considered ideal courting spaces. They were enclosed, warm, filled with beauty, but still public enough to avoid scandal. Some were even built on private estates just for this purpose. A stroll through ferns and palms could be a slow waltz of confession, if done properly. She stops before a cluster of bromeliads, vibrant and strange. You ask, do you like them? She replies, they're absurd, but I love them. Like little explosions of color pretending to be dignified. You laugh. And then the air grows quiet. You're both standing closer now. Not deliberately. Just, inevitably. The heat from the steam pipes has flushed her cheeks. A strand of hair has fallen loose. Your hand twitches at your side. You could take her hand, you could, and then, mercifully, or cruelly, her mother reappears. Shall we move along? There's a bench near the cactus house. You nod. Follow. Breathe, and as you walk behind them, watching the way her skirt brushes against the polished path, you begin to realize that something is happening, slowly, certainly, and soon, later, outside the conservatory, she turns to you once more. The others are hailing a cab, she says, thank you for coming. I had hoped you would. You reply, you need only ask. And for a moment, just one, she holds your gaze, no fan, no cousin, no floral distractions. Just two people in the hush of a late afternoon, poised on the edge of knowing. She lowers her eyes, and says, almost inaudibly, I'm glad you understand me. Not like me. Not admire me. Understand, and that, in Victorian terms, is everything. On the walk home, the fog is curling around lamp posts like ribbon. You hear the distant clip of hooves, the murmur of shop shutters being drawn. You reach into your coat pocket and feel the edge of the poem she gave you last week, creased, marked, read and reread until the ink feels memorized. You remember that people always describe love as lightning. Sudden. Irresistible, but this? This is more like a lantern being lit in a long hallway. One room at a time. A slow unfolding. A warmth you can step into without flinching. Now for your fringe tidbit, some Victorian young women kept courting albums. They were scrapbooks filled with pressed flowers from outings, copied poems, cryptic notes, or sketches of items that held meaning in an exchange. A clipped feather from a hat. A drawing of a chess piece. Entire conversations could live between the pages, encoded. You wonder, as you think of her standing by the orchids, whether she has one, and if she does, are you in it yet? Do you live there, between a leaf and a line of ink? You hope so, but you're not impatient. Not anymore, because now, the path forward isn't guesswork, it's paved with orchids. Folded pages. Shared laughter. A single line in a note, I thought of you. And that's enough to walk on for a very long time. You don't name it, of course. You don't label the notebook or tuck it inside a drawer marked affection. That would be far too bold for the moment. Instead, you leave it open on your writing desk, angled toward the lamplight. A petal here, a page crease there. Unspoken things held loosely between the lines. And in the quiet that follows, you realize you're not waiting anymore, not in that anxious, hollow way you did before the garden fete, before the croquet, before the soft weight of her trust began to settle in your chest like something permanent. Now, you're simply letting it grow, letting it arrive, letting it root, like one of those tropical orchids, strange, patient, and quietly magnificent. Outside, a soft breeze passes across the eaves. You hear the neighbor's cat leap from a fence. The city is still, but it feels full of potential, as if something is blooming just beneath its surface. You close your eyes. And in the fading warmth of your lamplight, you imagine her there, not in your arms. Not even in your room, but sitting across from you, smiling faintly, as if to say, I thought of you, too. Your footsteps echo differently now. You notice it one morning as you walk across the cobblestones toward her home. The air is cool, not cold, and the sky is that delicate shade of ash blue you only get before rain. You're holding an umbrella, just in case, and a small bouquet of sweet peas wrapped in linen, her favorite, though she's never said so aloud. You just happen to notice the way her hand lingered on them in a shop window. The way she paused, not long enough to point them out, but long enough to remember them, and now you do, because this, whatever this is between you, is no longer new. Not like lightning or a first glance. But like weather. Predictable. Rhythmic. Woven into the season. She opens the door herself. No footman this time. No chaperone hovering nearby. She's dressed plainly, her hair pulled back with a silver comb, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. She says, simply, you're early. And you reply, you expected me? And she, smiling that slow, careful smile, says, of course. There's no blush. No breathless flutter. Only that same steady fire that's been growing quietly between the two of you for weeks now. A warmth that no longer surprises you, but still moves you. You step inside. She takes the flowers without a word, buries her face in them, and sets them beside a book on the side table. Today, her parents are out. Not scandalously so, just visiting a neighbor. Running errands, trusting her with the sort of freedom that only arrives when everyone assumes nothing could possibly happen, and perhaps nothing will, but then again, perhaps everything already has. You settle in the parlor. The fire is low, half burned from earlier that morning. She picks up the kettle without asking and returns a moment later with 2 cups and a plate of sugar biscuits. You talk, and the talking feels different now. Not like a performance. Not like a chess match. but like two people sitting across from one another on a small raft, drifting steadily toward a shoreline neither of you has named, she tells you about her latest reading. A novel where the heroine disguises herself as a governess to escape a loveless engagement. You tease her, gently, planning something? And she replies, eyes glinting, only if you're the stable boy. You both laugh, quietly. There's no rush to fill the silence afterward, because the silence itself feels shared. Now for your mainstream fact, by the 1880s, calling hours and courtship visits had softened considerably. Where once visits were rigidly timed and constantly supervised. Growing comfort between families allowed certain liberties, afternoon teas alone, unscheduled drop-ins, even strolls in the garden if the staff were within sight. It wasn't freedom, exactly, but it was enough for possibility. You rise to examine the mantel. There's a sketch tucked behind a vase, charcoal on parchment. A garden scene. And at its center, drawn loosely but unmistakably, is you. You don't mention it, but your heart lodges somewhere strange in your chest. The conversation drifts to music, then to cousins, then to travel. She's always wanted to see the Highlands. You tell her about your uncle's crumbling estate near Oban, the ruin that overlooks the sea. I stayed there one summer. You say. Woke up each morning to fog and gulls. She leans forward. Take me. And the words hang there, as if they mean nothing, as if they mean everything. You offer no witty reply. Just a nod. A soft, honest one. I will, you say. When the time is right. And she doesn't ask when that is, she knows. Now for a fringe tidbit, some lovers in late Victorian England began to use photography to exchange secret mementos. Not formal portraits, but candid images, stolen with new handheld cameras, hidden in pockets, tucked into books. A blurred image of someone reading under a tree could mean more than 1,000 words. You wonder if she has one of you. You wonder if she's traced your outline with her thumb, because you know you've done the same. Evening begins to bleed into the room. The light changes, softens, slants. She rises to light a lamp, and you watch the way her silhouette blurs against the windowpane, and then, unexpectedly, she turns back to you and says, "There's something I'd like to ask." Your heart does that now familiar thud. You nod. She doesn't sit, she just says, very quietly, "Do you believe it's possible to know?" With certainty. You blink. Know what? Her eyes flicker, not away. Just down. At the floor. At the cup in her hands, that you love someone. That they're meant for you. You sit very still, you say, yes. Though it doesn't always arrive as thunder. And she smiles. No, she says. Sometimes it's just. One day you realize you don't want to keep wondering. The room grows very quiet. You stand. Walk to her. Stop only when you're near enough to see your reflection in her eyes. You don't take her hand. You don't touch her at all, you just say, "I stopped wondering a while ago." And something flickers across her face, relief, maybe. Or peace. Or simply truth, and she says, "So did I." Historians still argue whether love in the Victorian era was ever truly romantic, or merely a sequence of practical negotiations cloaked in flowery language. Was affection real? Or was it learned behavior, passed down like etiquette? You no longer care, because whatever this is, whatever it's called, it feels truer than anything you've ever known. You don't kiss her. That would be too much. Not yet, but you do sit beside her on the settee. And when your hands meet, they stay met. You don't even speak again for 20 minutes, just the two of you, there, in the hush, in the lamplight, and when her parents return, and you stand to leave, her mother studies your face a little longer than usual. And says, "Will you join us for dinner next week?" And that's how you know, everything has changed. You walk home in the rain, forgetting to open your umbrella. The sweet peas are gone from your hands but not from your mind. The air smells like earth and possibility. And your heart is loud, but not afraid. You sit at your desk. Reach for your notebook, and this time, you don't hesitate. You press a petal from the bouquet into the next blank page, write nothing. Just a flower, because that is enough. You close the notebook, slowly, and rest your palm on the cover as if to steady it, or maybe yourself. Outside, the rain has shifted to a gentler rhythm, tapping on the windows with a sleepy cadence, like a clock running without urgency. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage clatters through a puddle. The world, it seems, continues on, but you remain still, because part of you is no longer here in this room, part of you is still sitting beside her on that little settee, your hands touching in the kind of silence that doesn't ask for explanation. Part of you is still watching the way her eyelashes dipped when she said "so did I," as if she, too, had been carrying around the weight of wondering, and only now let it fall. You reach for the fireplace poker, stir the embers, and watch them blink back to life, and as the soft orange glow spreads again across the room, you whisper aloud, just to yourself, "She knows." It isn't a question, it's a truth, like rain, like sweet peas, like the quiet certainty of two hands finding each other in the middle of a long, careful century. You don't rush to propose, not because you're uncertain. Not anymore. That ship has long since set sail, drifting comfortably on a sea of quiet gestures, shared glances, and unspoken understanding. No, you wait because it's the Victorian way, and because, oddly enough, you find that you're not eager to end this chapter just yet. Courtship, it turns out, suits you, there's a certain rhythm to it now. You walk together often, always in the presence of a companion, of course, but that presence has grown symbolic. Her aunt brings a book and politely ignores you. The maid lags behind. Even her father, the former sentinel of scrutiny, now simply nods when you arrive. You visit the museum one Thursday and find yourself standing in front of a landscape painting, some dusky moor. Wild and windy, with a crumbling abbey in the corner. She leans closer and says, softly, "That's where I want to be when I'm old." You say, "Would you mind if I were there too?" She doesn't answer, she just reaches for your hand, only for a moment, and only behind her parasol, but that moment feels like a bell ringing somewhere inside your chest. Your days begin to gather weight, a gentle gravity, as if everything now carries the quiet hum of approaching permanence. The tea tastes different. The air smells richer. Even the streets seem more familiar, because now you've walked them with her. Now her memory clings to cobblestones and bakery windows and lamplit corners. You write more often now, not just your idle notebook scribbles, but actual letters. Letters you'll never send. Lines like, "I think I could have loved you in any century," and you make the waiting feel like part of the story. You don't even reread them. You just fold them, press them between pages, and let them exist like petals between the layers of a pressed flower. Some days, you pass her house without stopping, just to see the curtains shift. Other days, she sends a note. "Come if you like. There are sugar biscuits. You always like. You always go," and once, when you're sitting beside the hearth, she places a book in your hands. No inscription, just a thin leather bookmark tucked between two pages. You find the place and read the line she's marked, "All that I have ever sought / lies not in stars or steeples / but in the quiet breath / of a person who listens." She says nothing, neither do you, but you fold the page and memorize it, because she doesn't need to say it out loud, not anymore. Now for your mainstream historical fact, in the late Victorian era. Marriage proposals were still usually initiated by the man, but they were often understood, agreed upon in everything but words, long before the question was ever asked. The proposal itself became a formality, a ritual meant more for social clarity than emotional revelation. Families expected it. Friends anticipated it. But the couple? They already knew, and you know when she sends you a ribbon from her bonnet, for no reason. You know when she fixes your lapel in front of her father, and no one objects. You know when her mother begins asking your opinion about seasonal menus and what color wallpaper best suits a breakfast room. You know when she falls asleep, just briefly, beside you during a carriage ride. You don't wake her, you just sit there, heart echoing in your chest, hoping the road never ends. Now for your fringe fact, some Victorians held secret engagement rehearsals. These were whispered conversations between couples, often in gardens or hallways, where they would agree in principle, make promises beneath their breath, before the actual proposal occurred. The formal declaration, complete with kneeling and poetry, was for parents and announcements. The real decision happened in shadows, in glances, in sentences that trailed off halfway but said everything. You wonder if that moment has come already. Maybe in the library, or beneath the orchids, or last week when she pressed your gloved hand and whispered, "Don't wait too long. It's spring now, London is beginning to bloom. The streets smell faintly of lilac and wet stone. There's music floating from open windows, and vendors hawking strawberries at the corners. You've just come from a visit with your tailor, and your coat fits a little better than before. You've even gotten your hair trimmed, you carry the ring in your pocket, not always, just today, it's a simple thing. Modest, but meaningful. A stone that catches the light without shouting. You know she'll like that, you're headed to her house, but not to visit. Not for tea or books or conversation. Today you're meeting the family for dinner. A proper one. 5 courses. Her father's favorite brandy. Her mother's porcelain. You've done this before, but never quite like this, because tonight is not just dinner, tonight is permission. You sit through soup and venison and syllabub, smiling when required, answering questions about your finances, your family, your intentions. Her father listens. Her mother watches. She sits across from you and doesn't say much, but her foot taps softly beneath the table. And you know she's counting the minutes too. Finally, her father clears his throat. Walk with me. You do, out into the garden, past the rose arbor, down the path that leads to the summer house. He lights a cigar. Offers you one. You decline. He doesn't ask questions, he just says, "You've taken your time." You reply, "She's worth it." He exhales. The smoke drifts up into the twilight, then, finally, he says, "Ask her properly. Soon. I think she's ready." And you, heart thudding, fingers twitching around the outline of the ring, say, "So am I." You don't speak on the way back. There's no need. She's waiting near the stairs. You glance at her, she tilts her head, just slightly, and smiles. Historians still argue whether Victorian love was more genuine than ours or simply more poetic. Did they feel things deeper, or just speak about them more beautifully? Were their silences heavier, their glances more sacred? You think about that as you walk home, the ring still tucked safely away. You think about the poetry, the hesitation, the rituals that feel like dance steps passed down through generations, and you wonder, maybe all of this is what makes it last, not the ring. Not the words, but the waiting. The carefulness, the way you loved her before you were allowed to say it. You arrive home just as the first drops of rain begin to fall. You sit by the fire, pull out your notebook, and write just 2 lines. "Tomorrow, I asked the question," but she already answered. You close the book, check your pocket one more time, and fall asleep dreaming of orchids and sugar biscuits and a quiet yes that's been echoing between you for months now. You don't sleep much, the night passes in a kind of suspended breath, too gentle to be called anxious, too certain to be called calm. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the crackle of the fireplace, the tick of the long case clock, the occasional creak of the house settling into itself. Every sound feels louder than usual. Every shadow moves with intention. At some point, you rise and light the lamp. You don't reread the letter she gave you last month, though it's right there in the drawer, folded into a square soft with handling. You don't touch the ring either, though you know exactly where it is. You simply sit in the quiet, letting the weight of the coming day settle around your shoulders like a cloak. You're not nervous. That's the strange part. You thought you might be. But this isn't a leap, it's a crossing. You've been walking toward her for so long, it feels more like reaching a threshold than opening a door. When dawn finally arrives, pale and golden, you're already dressed. You pick your coat carefully. Straighten your collar. Run your thumb along the edge of the ring box before slipping it into your pocket. And then, you walk. The streets are quiet, just the milk carts and a few early vendors setting up stalls. Your boots echo gently on the cobbles. The air is fresh, tinged with chimney smoke and dew. It feels like a clean page. At her gate, you pause. This is the moment. Not the kneeling. Not the words. This breath, this heartbeat, this silence, is the moment you'll remember. The soft hush before the world shifts. She greets you herself. As always, she's calm. Thoughtful. She tilts her head at the sight of you, as if studying something familiar and beloved. You step inside, remove your hat, and she says, "They've gone to the country for the day." You nod. I know. No chaperone. No audience. Just you and her, and the quiet hum of something beautiful coming into bloom. You sit together in the garden, beneath the arbor this time. The roses are blooming, pale and fragrant. She's brought tea, though neither of you touches it. A book lies on the bench between you, unopened. She knows, and so do you. Now for your mainstream historical fact: Victorian proposals were often delivered in gardens or drawing rooms, chosen for their symbolism and quiet privacy. A garden especially suggested cultivation, patience, and growth, qualities prized in both romance and domestic life. It was a setting meant to reflect the bond itself, slow, tender, seasonal. You don't kneel. You don't need to, you simply take her hand. It's gloved, of course, but still warm, and you say, "I've carried this question with me for a long time. I've waited, not because I doubted, but because I wanted the moment to feel like us." She doesn't blink. Doesn't shift, so you continue, "I love you. And I would very much like to spend the rest of my life becoming even better at it." And then you open the box. She looks at the ring, then back at you, and smiles. "Yes," she says. No embellishment. No fanfare, just yes, the way you always hoped she would. There's no celebration. No immediate rush to tell the world. Instead, she leans against your shoulder. And you sit in silence, watching a bumblebee struggle sleepily against a rose petal. Somewhere in the hedges, a thrush begins to sing. The sun glints off the silver clasp of her bracelet, and time pauses. Later, you take a walk together through the neighborhood, your steps strangely light. People pass you by, none the wiser. She doesn't wear the ring yet, that comes later, after the formal announcement. But she walks close to you, close enough for your sleeves to touch, and it feels like the whole world has shifted ever so slightly toward brightness. Now for your fringe tidbit: some Victorian brides-to-be marked their engagement by secretly beginning a trousseau, a private collection of linens, nightwear, gloves, writing paper, and perfumes. Not because they were expected to marry quickly, but because building a life together began long before the wedding. Some young women kept a hope chest for years, quietly gathering their future. You wonder if she has one tucked away somewhere, a drawer, a trunk, a corner of her wardrobe where her future has already begun to take shape. You rather hope so. By the end of the week, your families have been informed. Her mother claps her hands and makes an uncharacteristically delighted sound. Her father nods gravely, then pours you both a celebratory brandy and says, "Well done, my boy." There are questions now, endless questions. Venues, dresses, menus, seasons. You say spring. She says autumn. You settle on late summer, in that golden window when the world feels warm and ripe and full of second chances. There are formal photos, of course, though you sneak in a less formal one, just the two of you in the garden, you seated on the bench, her standing behind you, hand on your shoulder. You keep a copy in your notebook. Folded, of course. You meet her cousins, her great-aunt, a godparent or two. She meets your younger brother, who raises an eyebrow and says, "You took long enough." You hold hands in front of others now. Carefully, but without hesitation, you begin to speak about we instead of I, and little by little, your life becomes something shared. Historians still argue whether Victorian engagements were truly romantic or simply prolonged negotiations. But what they can't deny is the depth of ritual, the quiet choreography of affection that played out in 100 tiny steps. Walking, writing, waiting, watching, you've danced that dance, and now, at last, it has brought you here, to an afternoon like this. It's the day before your wedding, your suit is pressed. The ring is shined. The vows are written, folded carefully in your coat pocket. You stand alone in your study, staring at a small box wrapped in paper. Inside, her final note. She sent it just this morning. You unwrap it slowly. The paper smells faintly of her perfume, lavender and tea roses. Inside is a card. The writing is simple: tomorrow we begin, but I've loved every step of the journey to get there. You sit very still, reading it again, and again, and again. The next morning dawns bright and golden, the church bells ring. The flowers bloom. People gather, speak, whisper. Her cousins are already crying. Your brother tries not to smirk. The aisle stretches before you like a ribbon waiting to be untied, and then, there she is, walking toward you, in white, eyes steady, smile quiet, and everything else, the weeks, the poems, the walks, the worry, melts away. All that remains is the sound of her steps, and your heart, and the final yes. And now, let it all soften. The carriages have gone. The guests are asleep. The cake is half eaten, the champagne flutes forgotten in the grass. The sky is turning velvet now, and the candles in the windows flicker low. Your hands are still laced with hers. Still warm. Still certain, the air smells like roses and late summer. Somewhere nearby, a slow song plays, just a few notes. Drifting gently through the air, barely there, you sit beside her. No need for words. No need for anything more than this. The world feels quiet, still, enough. You lean your head back. Let your eyes close. Let the warmth of the day, and the softness of her hand, and the memory of all those tiny, patient steps lull you into stillness. You lean your head back. Let your eyes close. Let the warmth of the day, and the softness of her hand, and the memory of all those tiny, patient steps lull you into stillness. You made it, through the letters and the glances, the gardens and the poems, the dances and the silences. You loved her in the most Victorian way imaginable, slowly, thoroughly, with every rule obeyed and every feeling honored, and in return, she loved you back, gently, deeply, without ever needing to say the word until it truly meant something. So breathe easy now, dim the lights, let it fade, sleep sweet, the story is complete, end of script. Sweet dreams.